The scream pierced through the cabin's gentle hum at 37,000 feet. Passengers jolted awake. Flight attendants rushed down the aisle. And somewhere in the chaos, a woman's voice shrieked into her phone. "There's a bomb on this plane. A terrorist is sitting right next to me." Dr. Amira Hassan looked up from her medical journal, her heart hammering against her ribs. The accusation hung in the recycled air like poison. Her husband, Samir's hand found hers across the armrest, his engineering textbook forgotten in his lap. In the window seat, their 12-year-old daughter Layla pressed her face against the glass, pretending not to hear the commotion behind them. Just 20 minutes earlier, they had been the picture of contentment. Samir had finally closed the laptop containing his latest bridge design proposals. Amira had been reviewing patient charts before their 2-week vacation to visit her sister in London. Layla had been practicing her Arabic vocabulary, excited to surprise her aunt with her improved fluency. The Hassan family had worked years for this moment. Samir's promotion to senior structural engineer had finally made the trip possible. Amira's recent recognition as the hospital's top emergency physician had granted her the time off. They had booked economy plus seats, a small luxury that felt enormous after years of careful budgeting. Now, as the woman behind them continued her hysterical phone conversation, everything unraveled in slow motion. "I'm telling you, he has wires coming out of his bag. I saw him praying in Arabic before takeoff." The voice belonged to Margaret Thornton, though the Hassans didn't know her name yet. They only knew the sound of hatred. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh approached with practiced calm, her smile tight. "Ma'am, I need you to end that call. We're going to sort this out." But Margaret, her bottle blonde hair disheveled from sleep, clutched the phone tighter. "No, they need to know this whole family is suspicious. Look at them. Look at what they're carrying." Amira's stomach dropped as passengers began turning in their seats. Eyes that had been friendly during boarding now held suspicion. The young mother across the aisle pulled her toddler closer. The businessman in 12A closed his laptop and stared openly. "Mom," Layla whispered, her vocabulary practice forgotten. "What's happening?" "It's okay, Habibti," Amira murmured, using the Arabic endearment that had sparked this nightmare. "Just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't okay. Captain Robert Hayes's voice crackled through the intercom, steady despite the chaos brewing in his cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a security situation that requires immediate attention. We'll be making an unscheduled landing in Denver. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." The plane banked left, and Layla's practice notebook slid to the floor. The Arabic words scattered like leaves, beautiful calligraphy now seeming foreign and threatening to the passengers around them. Margaret had upgraded herself to first class earlier that morning, using a combination of tears and threats about her late husband's military service. The gate agent, overwhelmed by the pre-flight rush, had moved her without proper verification. But when the flight attendants discovered the error during the safety demonstration, they had quietly returned her to her original seat in economy, plus directly behind the Hassan family. The humiliation had festered during takeoff. Margaret watched the happy family in front of her, their obvious affection, their easy laughter, their comfortable discussion of vacation plans, and felt her resentment crystallize into something darker. When Samir had briefly taken out his tablet to review some work files, the charging cable had indeed draped over his bag. When Amira had whispered a quick prayer of gratitude for their safe departure, she had used Arabic as naturally as breathing. These innocent actions, filtered through Margaret's prejudice and wounded ego, became sinister evidence. The descent into Denver was the longest 30 minutes of the Hassan family's life. Samir kept his hands visible on his tray table, knowing that any sudden movement might escalate the situation. Amira tried to project calm for Layla's sake, but her medical training couldn't stop her from cataloging every sign of her daughter's distress. The rapid breathing, the pale complexion, the way she kept glancing at the other passengers' faces. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" Layla asked in barely a whisper. Samir's jaw tightened. 20 years in America, a PhD in structural engineering, countless bridges bearing his signature. None of it mattered in this moment. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes people get scared of things they don't understand." The plane touched down with a hard bounce that seemed to shake more than just the aircraft. Through the small windows, the Hassans could see an intimidating array of emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, and several black SUVs that screamed federal authority. Captain Hayes' voice returned, more strained now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed safely in Denver. For security reasons, we need to evacuate the aircraft immediately. Please leave all personal belongings and exit through the main cabin door. Authorities will escort you to the terminal." As passengers began filing out, Margaret made sure to stay close behind the Hassan family. "That's them," she announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "The terrorist family. I saw everything." The jet bridge felt like a tunnel to hell. FBI agents in tactical gear waited at the gate, their faces grim and professional. Agent Maria Rodriguez stepped forward as the Hassan family emerged, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement. "Dr. Amira Hassan, Samir Hassan, Layla Hassan, you need to come with us immediately." The handcuffs clicked shut in full view of the other passengers. Layla began to cry, not the dramatic wails of a child having a tantrum, but the broken sobs of a young girl whose world had just shattered. Other passengers paused to stare, some recording with their phones, others whispering theories that would later become social media posts. "This is a mistake," Amira said quietly, maintaining her dignity, even as the metal bit into her wrists. "We're American citizens. We're doctors and engineers. Our daughter is 12 years old." Agent Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. She had seen this before, the collision between public safety protocol and human dignity. "We have to follow procedure, Doctor. I'm sure this will be resolved quickly." But quickly was relative. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of interrogation rooms, body searches, and background checks that the agent seemed to know would turn up nothing. The Hassan family's luggage was dissected piece by piece, their electronics examined by specialists, their personal belongings spread across stainless steel tables like evidence at a crime scene. Meanwhile, Margaret held court in the passenger waiting area, embellishing her story with each retelling. The wires from Samir's charging cable became suspicious electrical components. Amira's prayer became threatening chants in a foreign language. Layla's Arabic homework became terrorist code words. Agent Rodriguez returned after the third hour with the expression of someone who had just wasted significant federal resources. "Dr. Hassan, Mr. Hassan, you're free to go. There was never any credible threat. Your luggage is being reloaded, and the airline will arrange your continued travel to London." "What about the woman who made the false report?" Samir asked, his engineer's mind seeking logical consequences for illogical actions. The agent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's being handled separately." But the real revelation came from an unexpected source. Tom Mackenzie, the businessman from seat 12A, approached the family as they waited for their replacement flight. His face was flushed with embarrassment and something that looked like shame. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice heavy. "I was sitting close enough to hear everything. That woman, she was furious about losing her first-class upgrade. She specifically said she was going to make those people pay for her humiliation." Amira's medical training had taught her to read people, and she saw truth in Tom's eyes. "You heard her plan this?" "I heard enough. She was looking for any excuse to cause trouble. When your husband took out his charging cable, she actually laughed and said something about finally having her ammunition." Tom pulled out his phone. "I recorded her bragging about it to the passenger next to her. I thought you should know." The recording was damning. Margaret's voice, clear and proud. "I got them good. Nobody makes me look like a fool and gets away with it. Let them try to explain their way out of a terrorism charge." More witnesses emerged as Tom's courage inspired others. Jennifer Walsh, the flight attendant, revealed that Margaret had specifically asked about the Hassan family during the boarding process, making comments about their appearance and carry-on items. The gate agent remembered Margaret's aggressive demands for an upgrade and her explicit threats to make trouble if she didn't get her way. What had seemed like isolated prejudice was revealed as calculated revenge. Margaret hadn't just seen terrorists where none existed. She had manufactured a terrorist threat to punish a family for her own petty disappointment. The Hassan family's replacement flight to London was delayed another 6 hours while lawyers worked through the implications. During those hours, Amira watched her daughter struggle with questions no child should have to ask. "Mom, why do people hate us for praying?" Layla asked, her earlier excitement about surprising her aunt now completely extinguished. Amira chose her words carefully, knowing this conversation would shape her daughter's understanding of the world. "Some people are afraid of what they don't understand, Habibti. But that fear doesn't make their actions right. What happened today wasn't about us. It was about one woman's choice to let anger turn her into something cruel." Samir, who had been quietly processing the day's events, suddenly spoke up. "I keep thinking about all the bridges I've designed, all the structures meant to connect people and communities. Today, I watched someone deliberately try to tear down those connections." The family finally boarded their London flight at 11:47 p.m., exhausted and emotionally drained. But as they settled into their seats, upgraded to business class as a gesture from the airline, something remarkable happened. One by one, passengers approached to apologize, to offer support, to express their outrage at what had occurred. The elderly woman from the original flight brought Layla a small stuffed animal. "I have granddaughters your age. What happened to you today was wrong, and I wanted you to know that not all adults make such terrible choices." A young couple shared their extra snacks and asked Layla about her Arabic studies, genuinely interested in learning a few words themselves. The businessman Tom had given up his own business class seat to ensure the Hassan family could travel together in comfort. During the overnight flight, as Layla finally fell asleep between her parents, Amira reflected on the strange duality of human nature, how the same species could produce both Margaret's calculated cruelty and Tom's conscience-driven courage. 3 weeks later, back home in Chicago, the legal consequences began cascading down on Margaret Thornton, like the inevitable collapse of a structure built on flawed foundations. The FBI's investigation revealed the extent of her false report, the deliberate nature of her accusations, and the massive cost of her lies, over $200,000 in diverted flight expenses, federal investigation costs, and passenger compensation. More damaging still was the civil lawsuit filed by Atlantic Airlines. Margaret's actions had not only created immediate costs, but had exposed the airline to potential lawsuits from every passenger whose travel was disrupted, whose connections were missed, whose vacation plans were ruined. The airline's lawyers were methodical and merciless. They documented every expense: the fuel costs for the unscheduled landing, the overtime pay for crew members, the compensation packages for affected passengers, the security screening for all luggage, the replacement aircraft that had to be deployed, and the reputational damage control. Margaret sat in her lawyer's office. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. The woman who had felt so powerful, making her false report, now looked smaller than her actual size, diminished by the magnitude of consequences she had never considered. Mrs. Thornton, the airline is seeking $847,000 in damages. Her lawyer explained with the weary tone of someone delivering bad news to a client who absolutely deserved it. The federal charges for making false terrorism reports carry a potential sentence of 8 years, and the Hassan family's civil rights lawsuit seeks an additional $2.3 million. The number was staggering. Margaret's house, her late husband's pension, her savings, everything she owned wouldn't cover a fraction of the damages. Her comfortable retirement had become a financial catastrophe of her own making. "But I was just trying to protect people," she protested weakly, the lie sounding hollow even to herself. Her lawyer set down his pen and looked at her directly. "Mrs. Thornton, we have recordings of you admitting this was revenge. We have witnesses who heard you planning the false report. This isn't about protection. This is about the consequences of weaponizing people's fears for personal revenge." The criminal trial became a media sensation, not because of its legal complexity, but because of its stark moral clarity. Prosecutor David Chen built his case methodically, showing how Margaret's lies had not only harmed the Hassan family, but had potentially compromised real security by forcing authorities to waste resources on manufactured threats. When we respond to false terrorism reports, we divert resources from real threats. Chen explained to the jury, "Mrs. Thornton's actions didn't just hurt one family. They potentially endangered every air traveler by crying wolf in the most dangerous possible way." The defense's attempts to paint Margaret as a concerned citizen fell apart under cross-examination. When played the recording of her bragging about revenge, her lawyer visibly slumped in his chair. There was no spinning calculated malice into patriotic vigilance. Dr. Hassan's testimony was particularly powerful. She spoke with the measured precision of someone accustomed to life and death decisions, describing not just the immediate trauma, but the lasting impact on her daughter. Layla still flinches when she hears sirens. She asks me whether it's safe for her to speak Arabic in public. A 12-year-old child shouldn't have to calculate the safety risks of using her heritage language. Amira's voice never wavered, but the jury could see the controlled emotion behind her professional demeanor. "Mrs. Thornton didn't just file a false report. She taught my daughter that her identity makes her a target." Samir's testimony focused on the broader implications. "I've spent my career building bridges, literal ones that connect communities. What Mrs. Thornton did was the opposite. She tried to tear down the trust and connections that make diverse communities work." But it was Layla's impact statement, delivered with surprising poise for a 13-year-old, that seemed to affect the jury most profoundly. "I used to love flying. I would get excited about going through security, about watching the planes taxi on the runway, about that feeling when you take off and see the world get smaller below you. Now, when I see an airport, I remember being handcuffed in front of everyone, and I remember how scared I was that we were going to jail just for being Muslim." She paused, looking directly at Margaret for the first time since the trial began. "My mom taught me that when people are hurt, you try to help them heal. I think Mrs. Thornton must be hurt inside to want to hurt other people so badly. I hope someday she gets better." The compassion in that statement, coming from a child who had every right to be angry, seemed to break something in Margaret. For the first time since her arrest, she wept genuine tears, rather than tears of self-pity. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts: guilty of making false statements to federal authorities, guilty of filing false terrorism reports, guilty of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law. The judge's sentencing reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and Margaret's complete lack of remorse, until confronted with consequences. "Mrs. Thornton, you weaponized our national security apparatus for personal revenge. You traumatized a family and disrupted the lives of hundreds of innocent travelers. Your actions represent the worst kind of abuse of our legal system, using people's legitimate security concerns to pursue a petty grievance." The sentence was comprehensive: 4 years in federal prison, 5 years of supervised probation, $847,000 in restitution to the airline, $400,000 to compensate affected passengers, and placement on the federal no-fly list for 10 years after her release. But the most significant consequence was the precedent the case established. Federal prosecutors across the country began using the Thornton case as a model for pursuing false terrorism reports with the full weight of the law. The Hassan family's ordeal had prevented countless others from facing similar ordeals. Atlantic Airlines' response went beyond legal requirements. They issued a public apology to the Hassan family, created new training protocols for staff on handling discriminatory complaints, and established a scholarship fund in Layla's name for young women pursuing studies in Arabic language and Middle Eastern cultures. More significantly, they offered the Hassan family lifetime travel vouchers, not just as compensation, but as a statement that their business was built on connecting people, not dividing them. The vouchers came with a letter from the CEO that read, "In part, your dignity in the face of injustice represents the best of what air travel should be, bringing different communities together in mutual respect and understanding." The case also prompted legislative action. Congress passed the False Emergency Report Accountability Act, increasing penalties for fabricated terrorism reports and creating victim compensation funds for those affected by such false claims. The Hassan family was invited to attend the bill signing, where President Martinez specifically acknowledged their courage in pursuing justice. The Hassan family could have accepted a quiet settlement and moved on with their lives. Instead, they chose to stand up not just for themselves, but for every American who has been targeted by prejudice disguised as patriotism. Their courage has made all of us safer and more free. 2 years after that horrible day in Denver, the Hassan family finally took the London vacation they had planned. Layla, now 15 and fluent in 3 languages, had used her experience to become a youth advocate for civil rights. She spoke at conferences about the intersection of security and civil liberties, always concluding with the lesson her mother had taught her: courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to do what's right, even when you're afraid. During their London visit, they received an unexpected message from Tom Mackenzie, the businessman whose conscience had helped expose Margaret's lies. He had left his corporate job to work with a nonprofit focused on bystander intervention training, helping ordinary citizens find the courage to speak up when they witness injustice. "You probably don't remember me, but I can't forget you." His letter read, "Watching your family's dignity in that situation, and seeing how my small act of courage helped achieve justice, It changed my entire perspective on what it means to be a good citizen. The ripple effects continued expanding. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh had worked with airlines industry-wide to develop better protocols for handling discrimination complaints. Agent Rodriguez had become an advocate within the FBI for more nuanced threat assessment procedures that considered the source and motivation behind reports. Even some of the passengers who had initially been suspicious of the Hassan family reached out to apologize and express their support. Their embarrassment at their own prejudgments became motivation to examine their assumptions and biases more critically. On their last day in London, as the Hassan family prepared to return home, Layla stood at the departure gate, watching other families board their flights. She noticed the easy diversity of the passengers, families from dozens of countries and backgrounds, all traveling together without suspicion or fear. "This is what it should be like everywhere," she told her parents. "People just being people, going places, living their lives." Amira smiled at her daughter's wisdom. "And because we refuse to let one person's hatred define our experience, maybe it will be like this in more places." As their plane taxied for takeoff, Samir reflected on the structures he built, bridges designed to last for generations, connecting communities across physical divides. The legal and social consequences of their ordeal had built something similar: bridges across cultural divides, connections between communities that had previously viewed each other with suspicion. Margaret Thornton served her full sentence, emerging from prison to find that her comfortable retirement community had become a place where she was known primarily as the woman who had made false terrorism accusations. Her former friends struggled to reconcile the neighbor they thought they knew with the person whose calculated cruelty had been exposed in federal court. During her probation, she was required to participate in community service focused on civil rights education. The work was intended as punishment, but it gradually became something resembling redemption. Working with victims of discrimination, including others who had faced false accusations, forced Margaret to confront the human cost of her actions. She never contacted the Hassan family directly. Her lawyer had advised her that any contact could be seen as harassment. But through the Victim Services Coordinator, she sent a message acknowledging that no apology could undo the harm she had caused, and expressing gratitude that her victims had chosen justice over revenge. The Hassan family never responded to Margaret's message, but they didn't need to. Their response had been in their actions, pursuing justice not just for themselves, but for everyone who might face similar persecution. Their courage had created a safer, more just world for all travelers. Years later, when Layla graduated valedictorian from high school with early admission to Harvard's International Relations program, her speech quoted her mother's words from that terrible day. "Sometimes people get scared of things they don't understand." But she added her own conclusion: "The answer to that fear isn't to give in to it or let it control our actions. The answer is to choose understanding over suspicion, courage over fear, and justice over revenge. That's how we build a world where every family can travel freely, dream boldly, and belong completely." In the audience, Tom Mackenzie wiped away tears as he applauded. Agent Rodriguez nodded approvingly from her seat near the back. Even Jennifer Walsh had made the trip to Chicago to see the young woman whose dignity had inspired so many others to find their own courage. The Hassan family's ordeal had begun with one person's choice to weaponize fear and prejudice for petty revenge. But it had ended with hundreds of people choosing courage, justice, and understanding. In a world that often seems divided by hatred, their story proved that dignity and truth remain more powerful than lies and fear. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, on flights that now operated under enhanced anti-discrimination protocols, Other families traveled safely to their destinations, protected by the precedent set by three people who had refused to let injustice have the final word. The sky, once again, belonged to everyone.